The airfield was alive with noise and energy that morning. Families gathered with lawn chairs, children carried little plastic models of jets in their hands, and vendors shouted about popcorn and soda. The annual Air Force demonstration had always been the highlight of the summer in this small town, and people traveled from miles around just to watch the roar of fighter jets cut across the sky. But away from the main crowd, at the far edge of the fence line, sat one man who didn't look like he belonged. He was older, his back slightly bent, his face carved with the deep lines of a life that had seen both war and silence. His jacket was faded, the Air Force patch barely visible from decades of wear. He carried no flag, no camera, and no family stood beside him. Just a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and the kind of quiet presence that made him nearly invisible. To most, he was just another spectator. Maybe someone's grandfather who got dropped off early. To others, he looked out of place. Too plain, too solitary, too quiet. A few younger men near the fence chuckled when they saw him, whispering comments about old-timers who showed up just to pretend they were still part of something. They didn't know that this man once held the controls of machines faster than anything they had ever seen. They didn't know that the same hands resting quietly on his knees had once guided an entire squadron through storms of fire and steel. To them, he was nobody. To history, he was everything. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers, building anticipation for the arrival of the fighter jets. Kids climbed onto their parents' shoulders, pointing excitedly at the sky. The honor guard took their positions, marching in perfect rhythm before standing stiffly at attention. Everything about the event was polished, professional, predictable, except for him. The old man sat motionless. His eyes weren't on the crowd or the vendors or the ceremony. They were locked on the strip of concrete stretching into the horizon, the runway he knew better than anyone else here. Every crack, every painted line, every heat shimmer rising from the asphalt reminded him of years long gone. He remembered nights where his vision blurred with exhaustion, mornings where the cockpit smelled of oil and adrenaline, afternoons where the silence after landing felt heavier than the roar of engines in combat. But those memories lived only in his mind. The people around him saw nothing of it. A group of teenagers wandered closer to the fence where he sat. They laughed when one of them pointed at the patch on his jacket, so faded it was almost unreadable. "Hey, Grandpa," one of them called out, loud enough for nearby families to hear. "You waiting for your jet to come pick you up?" The others laughed. Some in the crowd frowned at the disrespect, but no one said anything. The old man didn't react. He simply adjusted his chair slightly, his eyes never leaving the runway. Another voice joined in, this time from a young man in a polo shirt who looked like he worked in logistics for the event. "Sir, the veteran seating is over by the stage. This area is restricted." The old man's voice was calm, steady, almost too quiet to be heard over the background noise. "I'll sit here." The worker rolled his eyes. "Suit yourself. Just don't get in the way." Again, the old pilot didn't move. He knew exactly where he wanted to be. As the crowd swelled with excitement, the first distant roar of engines rolled across the sky. 4 sleek fighter jets appeared on the horizon, sunlight glinting off their wings as they flew in perfect diamond formation. Cheers erupted from the stands. The old man didn't cheer. He didn't clap. He simply raised his hand slowly, almost imperceptibly, and touched his cap. It was a gesture so small that most would have missed it. But one pair of eyes in the control tower didn't. Captain Daniel Morgan, leader of the demonstration squadron, had been scanning the perimeter as he prepared for the pass. His eyes locked on the east fence line. There, in the shade of the hangar, sat the old man, steady, unmoving, saluting in silence. Something about him caught Morgan's breath. He couldn't explain why, but he knew instantly. That man wasn't just a spectator. He was someone. The jets thundered overhead, breaking the sound of the crowd with precision maneuvers. Loops, rolls, and synchronized dives drew applause after applause. The announcer shouted into the microphone, narrating every detail. But Morgan wasn't listening. He was thinking about the man at the fence. He remembered a story his father once told him about an ace pilot who disappeared from the public eye after Vietnam. A man who never wrote a memoir, never gave interviews, but whose name was spoken with quiet reverence in pilot circles. A ghost. Could it be him? The idea seemed impossible, but when Morgan banked his jet for the next maneuver and glanced back down at the fence, the old man was still there, still saluting, still waiting. Meanwhile, those who had mocked the old man earlier were growing restless. One of them pointed again. "Look at him! He's saluting like they can even see him from up there. Crazy old guy." A woman nearby frowned. "Maybe show some respect. You don't know who he is." The teens laughed it off. The old man didn't react, but others began to notice. A veteran in a faded Marine cap, standing a few rows back, removed his own hat and stood quietly at attention. Then another followed. Within moments, a small cluster of veterans near the east line were all standing, not facing the announcer's stage, but facing the old man. The shift in energy was subtle but powerful. Something was happening, something bigger than the air show itself. Morgan's radio crackled with the next set of commands. The squadron was preparing for the signature finale maneuver, the four-point peel that always left the crowd cheering. But Morgan's eyes drifted once again to the fence. He spoke quietly into the comms. "Team, slight adjustment on my lead. Stay tight until I break." No one questioned him. They trusted their leader. As the jets climbed into formation, the crowd gasped at the sheer beauty of the maneuver. Engines roared, wings sliced the sky, and children screamed in delight. But down by the fence, the old man's eyes glistened. He had seen countless flights, countless missions, countless passes over battlefields, but this moment felt different. For the first time in decades, he wasn't invisible. The jets aligned for their final pass. The announcer's voice boomed with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for the grand finale, the Diamond Peel." But just as the crowd prepared their cameras, the lead jet dipped out of formation. Gasps echoed across the field. The announcer stuttered mid-sentence. The old man lowered his hand from his cap, his eyes steady, knowing exactly what was about to happen. The crowd was ready for the finale. Cameras raised, children balanced on their father's shoulders. The announcer's voice was building like a drum roll. And then, without warning, the lead jet broke formation. Gasps rippled across the crowd. For a moment, no one understood what was happening. Some thought it was a mistake. Others whispered about a malfunction. But the jet moved with too much grace, too much control, for it to be anything but intentional. Captain Morgan tilted his fighter gently, wings leveling as he descended lower and lower toward the eastern perimeter, the forgotten fence line where the old man sat. The roar of the engine softened, the afterburners quieted. Instead of thunder, the jet passed in silence. A low, reverent glide, as if bowing to the man below. The old pilot stood. His movements were slow but deliberate. He removed his cap and placed his weathered hand firmly over his heart. The jet dipped its nose, wings tilting in a salute that only a trained aviator would recognize. But everyone watching felt it. This wasn't part of the show. This was something sacred. The laughter from earlier vanished. The teenagers who had mocked him stood frozen, their smiles gone. Parents hushed their children. The announcer stumbled over his words, then fell silent altogether. One by one, hats came off. Veterans in the crowd snapped to attention. Even civilians felt the weight of the moment, standing straighter without understanding why. For the first time that day, the airfield was silent. No cheers, no chatter, just the sound of a jet slicing through the sky in quiet tribute. Among the stunned silence, whispers began to spread. Someone near the back recognized the patch on the old man's jacket. Another pointed out the faint wings pinned on his chest. A veteran in the crowd muttered a name under his breath. "Colonel James Hawthorne." Others turned. "Who?" "The Phantom Ace, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. He flew missions no one talks about." The names spread like fire through dry grass. Phones buzzed, searches began, old photos surfaced from veteran forums. Within minutes, the story was piecing itself together. Dozens of covert missions in hostile skies, rescue operations under heavy fire, a pilot who disappeared into obscurity after retiring, never writing memoirs, never giving interviews. And here he was, the man they had mocked, the man the jet had saluted. The jet ascended, rejoining the formation high above. But it didn't matter. The show was over. The real spectacle had already happened. The old pilot lowered his hand slowly, his eyes glistening with the weight of memory. Around him, strangers stared with newfound respect. Some whispered apologies under their breath. Others simply stood in silence, as if afraid that any noise would break the spell. One young airman, barely 20 years old, stepped forward from the crowd. He snapped to attention and gave a trembling salute. The old man met his eyes, nodded once, and returned the salute with steady precision. The crowd erupted, not in cheers but in applause, a slow rolling wave that began with a few and spread across the entire field, not for the air show, not for the formation, but for him. When the jets landed and the ceremony concluded, people didn't rush to the exits. Instead, they gathered near the east fence. Some wanted to shake his hand, others simply wanted to see him, to confirm that he was real. Reporters tried to push forward, but veterans blocked them, forming an impromptu wall of protection. This wasn't a moment for headlines. It was a moment for memory. The old pilot said little. He thanked those who came forward, shook a few hands, but mostly remained quiet. For him, silence had always spoken louder than words. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the old man folded his chair, slung it over his shoulder, and began to walk away. No entourage, no interview, no announcement, just a steady walk toward the parking lot. But this time, people moved aside for him, heads bowed, veterans saluted. A little boy tugged on his father's sleeve and whispered, "Dad, was he a hero?" The father knelt down, his voice thick with emotion. "The kind you don't read about in books, son. The kind you only meet once." By evening, photos had already gone viral. The image of the jet dipping low. The shot of the old man standing alone, hand over his heart. The young airman saluting him. Hashtags filled social media. Silent salute, Yacht forgotten ace. Respect the veterans. News outlets scrambled for confirmation, but military records offered little. Most of his missions remained classified. What they found was enough: multiple commendations, whispers of covert operations, decades of service that few had ever known. Back at home, the old pilot sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp casting light over faded photographs. He didn't look at the TV playing the coverage. He didn't read the articles. He simply held an old mission patch between his fingers, the same patch he once tucked into his jacket after his final flight. For him, the day had not been about recognition. It had been about something simpler, that after years of silence, someone had remembered. And for everyone who witnessed it, the message was clear. Some heroes never ask for applause. Some heroes never tell their stories. But when the moment comes, the world remembers anyway. So I'll ask you, have you ever met someone like him? Someone who carried greatness quietly, without asking for anything in return? If you have, write their name in the comments, because they deserve to be remembered. And if this story touched you, subscribe to help us keep their legacy alive. These are not just stories, these are lives, and their silence was earned.